Notre Dame spring practice might be wrapping up, but the storylines are far from over. Kenny Minchey and CJ Carr look like legit options to be Notre Dame's next starting quarterback, and the defense has a few new playmakers, but while some players are rising, one familiar face could soon become the enemy, at least for one day in late November. That's all coming right up on today's Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome in. This is Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer at Fox Sports, and I hope you enjoyed a nice and relaxing Easter weekend. And I appreciate you joining me here on Tuesday, April 22nd. Thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you to please subscribe on YouTube or wherever you are listening to the podcast. And this episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. All right, we are smack dab in the middle of the spring transfer portal window, and while the dust has not completely settled, more moves are going to be made. We've got a pretty clear picture of who made real noise this spring and whose stock is on the rise heading into summer workouts. So today's episode is all about movement. We're going to start with 4 offensive players who made a big leap over this past month, and then we're going to shift gears and talk about 3 guys in the defense who are making a case for bigger roles in 2025. Then we're going to wrap things up with some very interesting developments in regard to the transfer portal and a couple of Notre Dame's opponents this fall, because now former Notre Dame quarterback Steve Angeli just took an official visit to Syracuse, and if he ends up with the Orange, the storylines write themselves. Notre Dame faces Syracuse on Senior Day in November, plus a former Notre Dame safety, Kennedy Urlacher, is headed to USC because, of course, Chad Bowden is out there to stir the pot. But we begin with the players who are still on Notre Dame's roster. We're going to start with the offense, and I think the future of this Irish offense is taking shape, and a few names are climbing fast. 2 of those names are a couple guys you've heard about quite a bit on this podcast and pretty much every other Notre Dame football show or article that has been written over the course of the past several months. I'm kind of taking a cop-out here. I am putting Kenny Minchey and CJ Carr as the 2 biggest movers on offense. Is it a cop-out? Yeah, probably. But it is now clearly a 2-man race to be the Notre Dame quarterback in 2025. And last year, Kenny Minchey was 3rd string. And CJ Carr was 4th string, basically the scout team quarterback. That's how he ended up getting hurt and ended up missing most of the fall while he was dealing with that injury. But now they are both battling for QB1 after Steve Angeli officially entered his name into the transfer portal over the weekend. And last year, it felt like there was a pretty significant gap between Steve Angeli at number 2 and Kenny Minchey at 3, because if Minchey had really come close to beating him out during last season, I think Notre Dame would have tried to get Kenny Minchey out there during some of those garbage time reps, because while Notre Dame was on that streak to close out the regular season when they won 10 straight and they were just beating the brakes off every team they played, Steve Angeli got a lot of work in those games, and it felt like the Notre Dame coaching staff went out of their way to put Steve Angeli in the game. Like, he was coming in during the 3rd quarter of some of these blowouts, and he was going out there with the ones, and I always felt like if Kenny Minchey was making a move during the season, they would let Kenny Minchey get some of those reps, but that just never really happened, with the Purdue game being the one exception where Minchey and Carr actually both got a few snaps in that game. But Kenny Minchey closed the gap and then some this spring, because I think he beat out Angeli, and I think CJ Carr did the same. And I think they made their 2 biggest moves on the 2 most important days of spring practice, because there's 15 total practices in the spring session. Not all of them were built the same. Some of them were only like an hour long, but then you had the big scrimmage that happened on April 5th, not necessarily the Jersey scrimmage, but still like 60 plays live between the offense and the defense. And then, of course, the blue gold game on April 12th. And Gino Guidugli and even Marcus Freeman said that the most important time to evaluate all the players, but specifically the quarterbacks, is when they were competing in team drills. And that's what they did on those 2 practices. And in that scrimmage on April 5th, Kenny Minchey really stood out. We had Jamie Uyeyama from Irish Sports Daily here on the show, who was there to witness that practice, and he said, yeah, Kenny Minchey really balled out. Tim Priester from Irish Illustrated also said that Kenny Minchey had the most impressive day of any of the other Notre Dame quarterbacks. And I understand that there's some people out there who might disagree, but the fact that Kenny Minchey was up there at the top suggests that he had a really good day, right? And then in the spring game, a week later, it was CJ Carr's day, right? He was the one who shined the brightest of any of the quarterbacks. He had a 73% completion percentage in that game. He threw for 170 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, did have that 1 interception, but overall, great performance by C.J. Carr in that game. Kenny Minchey, not that far behind. He was like 6 of 14 passing, but I think some of that wasn't his fault. Had 106 pass yards, ran the ball well, just looked really good. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about who is going to win the battle between these two, but the fact that they both played well enough to get the competition to this point where Steve Angeli went from potential starter to out the door, I think is really, really impressive. So credit to both those guys who made really big moves this spring. The CJ Carr one was a little bit more expected. Kenny Minchey was kind of written off before spring started. Some people didn't even think he was in the race to be QB1. I felt like he was definitely a part of that race and had a shot, but I say going into spring, I didn't think he was ultimately going to be, in the mix for QB1 at this point in time, but I was wrong. So credit to Minchey, credit to Carr. It's going to be a great battle all summer long. Now, as for number 2, maybe the biggest surprise of the spring, Elijah Burress, the early enrollee freshman wide receiver. I think he made the biggest move of any of the early enrollees on either side of the ball. He's a crisp route runner, has good acceleration, and has the ability to separate no matter who is lined up against him. Like I think Devontae Smith, the transfer nickelback from Alabama, went out of his way to compliment Elijah Burress. And when you have a guy who's really been around college football and has seen some stuff in the SEC, when he's complimenting an early enrollee freshman, that stands out. And he did it with his play on the practice field. I was higher on Elijah Burress coming out of high school, certainly more so than his recruiting ranking would suggest. Now, part of that is because his dad was Plaxico Burress, a really, really good receiver in the NFL, 2-time Super Bowl champion, but he was not rated very high coming out of high school. He was like a low 4-star, rated as the 61st best wide receiver in the class of 2025 on the 24/7 composite. I think Rivals had him outside of the top 100. Meanwhile, 24/7 had him like in the top 300 players nationally. So his ranking was all over the place, right? But I think most people thought that he could come in and develop into a good receiver down the line, but he made such a great first impression. There's a chance he's going to be playing for the team and getting real snaps this fall. The one thing that stood out to me immediately is that he's bigger than I thought he was. He's listed at 6 foot, 182 pounds. I think in his recruiting profile, he's 188 pounds, but those get grossly exaggerated sometimes, and he just looks skinny. So the fact that he's already 182 is certainly a good sign. He's going to bulk up more as he spends more time in college, but he's one of those guys whose name just kept popping up early and often during these spring practice sessions, and then he capitalized in a big way in the scrimmage and in the blue gold game. He had the most targets of any wide receiver in that scrimmage, then had 2 catches for 21 yards and a touchdown in the spring game. Now, granted, part of that has to do with the fact that he had a lot more opportunities because a bunch of guys were out. I mean, Malachi Fields was not even able to participate. Jordan Faison was limited while he plays on the lacrosse team. Jaden Greathouse was out there, but not taking as many reps because he's just coming off a full season. Will Pauling was hurt. Micah Gilbert broke a couple fingers like early on. So there really weren't that many wide receivers who could go out there, but credit to Elijah Burress for taking advantage of that opportunity. I don't know if he's going to be like in the top 6 guys in the fall because, I mean, we know Fields, Faison, Greathouse, and Pauling are certainly going to be in the mix so long as they stay healthy. And I think Micah Gilbert, if he's healthy, he's going to factor into that equation as well. But now I went from saying I don't think any of these freshman wide receivers were going to do anything for the offense this year to now seriously considering whether or not Elijah Burress is going to make a move into that rotation. And as for number 3 for the offense, or I guess I should say 4, considering I took the cop out and put Kenny Minchey and CJ Carr at the top, you got Eli Raridon, who is not really a new name, right? Fans are very familiar with him. He's played a lot of snaps for Notre Dame, but this is his chance to really break out now that he is the true bona fide tight end 1 for this Notre Dame offense. He is finally fully healthy, came off a season in which he didn't suffer any major injury, and this was a really big spring for him. And I think that he really took advantage of that. He had 2 catches for 21 yards in the spring game, limited action, but he also had one of the best plays of the scrimmage the week prior when he took a 45-yard, or when he took a tunnel screen, 45 yards, set up a touchdown. And I think what he's really shown an ability to do that he didn't always showcase in the past is that he can really run after the catch. Like, the size has always been there. He's 6'7", 251 pounds, has like 5% body fat. But when he'd get the ball, you'd think, man, for someone with his size, his physique, and his athleticism, he should be able to make a few guys miss. That wasn't always the case. Well, it looks like that's the case now, and I think part of that has to do with his health. His stat line last year, not very impressive. 11 receptions for 90 yards and 2 touchdowns, being the number 2 tight end, sometimes the number 3 tight end, depending on how Notre Dame was utilizing Cooper Flanagan in that game. But he's clearly the top guy for this Notre Dame offense at tight end this year, and they really, really need him to have a big season. He looked really athletic when he was running the ball. That's encouraging. Needs to be a little bit more secure with the football. He did fumble in the spring game, but then he just immediately recovered his own fumble. He also had a couple drops last year, so he needs to clean that up. But I think this is a really, really encouraging development for Notre Dame because you're going to have a young quarterback. The best safety net for any quarterback, especially a young quarterback, is a really solid tight end, and it looks like Eli Raridon is finally about to live up to that potential. Still holding out hope. You know, you still need to see it to believe it on Saturdays in the fall, but what Eli Raridon did this spring, I think he made a significant move, one of the biggest movers of anyone on the offense, and if he can deliver a breakout season, that just makes life so much easier on whoever wins the starting quarterback job, and it makes this Notre Dame offense even more dynamic. So the offense certainly has some rising stars, but the defense was not far behind. There's one linebacker in particular, though, that may finally be ready to live up to his 5-star hype. More on that right after this. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge. It's electric in the arena, and with Game Time, you can be part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Game Time makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets even when demand is sky high. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. Here's why I use Game Time. Their last-minute deals, you can save up to 60% off by buying last-minute tickets for sports, but also concerts, comedy, theater, you name it. Plus, the all-in pricing means no surprise fees at checkout. What you see is what you pay. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, now let's shift it over to the defense and talk about a few players who made a big leap on that side of the ball this spring. And I think first up, it's Jaylen Sneed. And if you think about it, Jaylen Sneed and his career arc is pretty similar to Eli Raridon. Now, it's not apples to apples, right? But they both came in with 5-star potential, and now going into their 4th season, they have not really lived up to it just yet. Now, Jaylen Sneed has contributed more at Notre Dame than Eli Raridon has up to this point, I would say. He's already played a lot of football with the Irish, but it feels like his best is yet to come. So last year, at least at the start of the year, he was listed at 6'1", 222 pounds. And when he entered Notre Dame as an early enrollee freshman a few years ago, he wasn't even 200 pounds. As a linebacker in college football, it's probably going to be pretty difficult to not even weigh 200 pounds and see the field. So Sneed had to redshirt. It took some time. But now he's up to 238 pounds in good weight. He said it, and linebackers coach Max Bullis said it as well. He backed him up. So it's not just his size, though. It's his consistency, and that's always been kind of the issue with Jaylen Sneed. For every great play he makes where his athleticism is on full display, he'll follow it up with a mental mistake that really puts him and the defense in a bad spot. Just think about his insane stop near the goal line against Texas A&M in the season opener last year. Like, it was a play that very few guys could make. He came around the edge, chased down the running back, and made a play behind the line of scrimmage. Like, he led Notre Dame in stops last season because he's able to just cover so much more ground than the average player on the front seven of an elite defense, even in the case for Notre Dame last year. But then the following week against Northern Illinois, like, he got benched in that game for just completely taking the wrong angle on a ball carrier that set up a big play. And then a couple games later, he barely played in that win over Louisville. But then a few weeks after that, he had 9 tackles and a touchdown against Navy. So it just was a roller coaster ride last season for Jaylen Sneed, but he played some of his best football in the playoff, and he made one of the best plays of the year against Penn State when he got some pressure on Drew Aller and set up the interception for Christian Gray. So I think he was able to take some momentum into the offseason, but then it was a decision of whether or not he wanted to come back. And Marcus Freeman was pretty transparent about the fact that Jaylen Sneed was considering transferring after last season, but Sneed decided to stay, and he's carried some of that momentum from the college football playoff into the spring. This is what Marcus Freeman had to say about how Jaylen Sneed has practiced this spring. Quote, "This is the best spring Jaylen Sneed has had. He's practiced at a level it takes to be a great player." End quote. That is really, really encouraging for this Notre Dame defense because he is the best athlete on that side of the ball when you combine his size and his speed. And this defense needs veterans. They just lost Xavier Watts. They lost Jack Kaiser. They lost Howard Cross and Riley Mills. And now Jaylen Sneed is going into his fourth year of the program. This is his fourth spring with the Irish, and the fact that he's taking this big of a step, even though it's a little bit later than some of us probably would have hoped for when he committed to Notre Dame out of high school, this is a huge development. I never really looked at him, at least in recent years, as like an every down linebacker. I thought he was really good at getting after the passer, but considering some of his inconsistent play, I didn't know if he was a guy you could count on every single down, but that might change this season. It looks like Drake Bowen has the Mike linebacker spot locked down. Now, Kingston Miliamu-Asa is certainly going to rotate in there as well because he's just that good. But now you got to consider whether or not Jaylen Sneed is just going to be the starting will linebacker and not just be like a package player on that defense. So I think he's still going to continue to get after the quarterback, but I would not be surprised if he becomes a starter, and that linebacker rotation really is going to just go down to Bowen, Sneed, Cavier, and Jane Osbury, with Manfremo maybe getting the mix as well, and potentially Preston Zinter. But really excited about what Jaylen Sneed could do, because if he reaches his full potential, like that is just a scary, scary sight for opposing offenses on Notre Dame's schedule. And number 2, I got cornerback Karson Hobbs. So Hobbs is an interesting story because he basically had to live in the shadow of Leonard Moore last season. Leonard Moore and Karson Hobbs were in the same recruiting class, and Hobbs was not nearly rated as high as Leonard Moore. Leonard Moore was like a high 4-star. Hobbs was a 3-star prospect, not even listed in the top 50 cornerbacks in his class on any of the recruiting sites. But the one thing he had going for him is that Mike Mickens liked him, and that should be pretty much all the indication you need that he could be something special, because Mike Mickens is just that good of an evaluator. And if he liked Hobbs and he was really high on Hobbs in high school, then clearly he was better than his recruiting ranking would suggest. And now it looks like he's going to take that and actually apply it to the field this fall. It looks like he is ready to make a name for himself. He certainly has the demeanor to play cornerback, likes to talk some trash, is very confident, but now he also has the size, athleticism, and skills to back it up. He's 6'1", 188 pounds, so he's a bigger cornerback. He also says he's the fastest guy on the team. Yep, faster than Jeremiah Love, at least according to Karson Hobbs. We'll see, right? I'm a bit skeptical about that, to say the least, but if he's anywhere close, you know, that's a great sign for this Notre Dame defense. And he just basically said, like, when they do the testing and the strength and conditioning program, he says that he's at the top of everything, not just the 40. I'm talking vertical, broad jump, all that stuff. And he didn't really get to showcase it a lot last season. He played a little bit on special teams and in garbage time, but he did not redshirt. He appeared in 9 games during the regular season, had about 83 snaps total, but now it looks like he could really be a key piece on the defense this fall. He's still going to be behind Leonard Moore. He's still going to be behind Christian Gray, obviously. But, like, he could be the first cornerback off the bench. And we know that Mike Mickens will rotate his guys in if he thinks they're capable. Like, there were times last year before Benjamin Morrison got hurt where he would bring in Leonard Moore and Jaden Mickey early on in the season for a full series. I didn't always agree with it, but he would do it. And when Christian Gray was a freshman, he played. And that's when Notre Dame had Benjamin Morrison and Cam Hart out there. So the fact that Mike Mickens was like, hey, Christian Gray is good enough to play. He's going to get some drives, not in garbage time with the rest of the ones on defense. I think Karson Hobbs is going to be in a position to do that again this year. And also, we saw what happened last year with the amount of injuries that can accrue over the course of a 16-game season. If Notre Dame has hopes of making it back to the national championship, injuries are going to happen. Depth is going to be tested, and Karson Hobbs is one of those guys that you really need on your bench who can come in at a moment's notice and really deliver. He had 4 tackles in the spring game, including one of the most impressive plays of the game. when it was just him and Kedron Young, who was all of 230 pounds in the open field. Young tried to make a move on him, and Hobbs was not having it. He brought him down to the ground immediately. It was a complete solo tackle, a great play by Karson Hobbs, and he also added a pass breakup in the game that honestly should have been intercepted, but I really, really like what I saw from Karson Hobbs in the spring, and now I think it totally changes his trajectory for Notre Dame starting as early as this fall. Another defensive back that I think made a huge move this spring, Luke Talich. And if I'm going to compliment Karson Hobbs and his stop on Kedron Young, then I also got to compliment Luke Talich's stop on Aeneas Williams. It was 4th and goal near the goal line, and Talich came in, laid the wood on him, and the whole crowd went, ooh, because it was just that big of a hit. He led the game with 9 total tackles, 4 more than the group of players who was tied for second with 5. He just flies around the football, and he has that size and length that Notre Dame is looking for in a safety. He's 6'4", he's 213 pounds, his hands are like next to his knees, and he's more athletic than people give him credit for. His rise, coupled with Tay Johnson's rise at safety as well, is a big reason why Kennedy Urlacher is in the portal and now headed to USC. He's already flashed at Notre Dame in real key moments, like he had that huge hit on the punt returner in that game against Penn State in the college football playoff semifinal. Like, that was a pretty key moment in the game because Notre Dame was starting to turn the tide a little bit, and then he made that play, and I think it was just a signature moment where everyone on the Penn State sideline had to realize, oh man, this game might be getting away from them. He also made a great play against Northern Illinois when he forced a fumble on a punt return, but unfortunately, Northern Illinois was able to recover that. If Notre Dame was able to recover that ball in that scenario, which they honestly should have, then Notre Dame probably wins that game, and the entire season is different because of that one moment that was all set up by Luke Talich. He also, of course, had the interception return for a touchdown against Florida State, but that was in garbage time. So look, I still expect Jalen Stroman to start alongside Adon Schuler at safety for Notre Dame this year, but Talich made a really strong case to at least be the first guy off the bench, and Notre Dame is going to rotate a lot more at safety this year than they have in the past because Xavier Watts is out the door. And can you replace Xavier Watts with one player? No. But maybe you can replace him in the aggregate. Shout out to Moneyball. It's going to take a lot, but Luke Talich is certainly going to factor into that equation. I love his story. I love that it's already paid off in the sense that he earned a scholarship after starting out as a walk-on when he turned down full scholarships to real programs like Utah and even Oregon State. But now I think that story is going to reach a new level this year when he becomes a real factor on Chris Ash's defense. So while Notre Dame's defense continues to take shape, the transfer portal is stirring up some real drama, including a potential revenge game on Senior Day and a familiar name flipping to USC. That's coming up next on Locked On Irish. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. Whether it's strikeouts, RBIs, or first-inning runs, Prize Picks keeps every game exciting. This week, I'm picking Aaron Judge for more than 1 home run and Shohei Ohtani for more than 1 stolen base. It's that easy. Setting up a lineup takes less than 60 seconds, and when you win, your payout is quick, safe, and secure. I always take advantage of Taco Tuesday, and it's Tuesday today, mind you, where Prize Picks offers discounts on select player projections for even more value. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, I wanted to wrap up today's show with a couple things on the transfer portal. So there is a very interesting development going on in upstate New York. On3, Steve Wiltfong reported that Steve Angeli, former Notre Dame quarterback who entered the transfer portal over the weekend, was on Syracuse's campus Monday for a visit. And from Steve Angeli's standpoint, this makes a ton of sense. First of all, Angeli is from New Jersey. Syracuse is much closer to home than Notre Dame. And Fran Brown, their head coach, did a really good job in his first season with the Orange after he came over from Georgia. He has a lot of juice, certainly, has built up a lot of excitement around that pretty dormant football program, and they had the nation's top passing offense in 2024 with Kyle McCord at quarterback, who was pretty good, and they had a new offensive coordinator in Jeff Nixon. Jeff Nixon was one of the hottest commodities of any college football assistant this past offseason, but he decided to sign a multi-year extension with Syracuse. So now there's a lot of pressure on that Syracuse offense to get a new quarterback who could replace what Kyle McCord did for them last season. When you look at the numbers, it is really impressive. So in 2023, when Kyle McCord was the quarterback for Ohio State, he threw for 3,170 passing yards, 24 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Pretty good numbers. Now, probably wanted a little bit more if you're Ohio State because they had Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka at wide receiver, and they didn't really accomplish any of their goals. They lost to Michigan, all that stuff. But in one season at Syracuse, McCord threw for nearly 4,800 passing yards, 34 touchdowns, but he also did throw for 12 interceptions, 5 of which came against Pittsburgh. He did throw a lot more often with the Syracuse Orange offense, like 582 attempts, but any quarterback is going to see those numbers and be intrigued. So if Angeli goes to Syracuse, he's probably got a great chance to showcase his abilities, but the storyline around his departure would certainly change quite a bit because Syracuse plays at Notre Dame on Senior Day in 2025. So it's becoming increasingly likely that Steve Angeli could be suiting up to face Notre Dame in the last home game of the regular season, which would have been his senior day if he decided to stay. This schedule for Notre Dame, they've already got a bunch of juicy matchups. They might not have like the marquee game of a Notre Dame Ohio State like they had in 2023, but Miami on the road to start the season is fun. Texas A&M, USC, hell, even Boise State. Like there's a lot of interesting games on this schedule. And now, if Steve Angeli were to end up at Syracuse, that would have a lot of intrigue as well. It's kind of like when Sam Hartman faced Wake Forest in his last home game with Notre Dame in 2023, going up against his former school. So now the roles would be reversed a little bit. And in a way, like it feels kind of fitting that Steve Angeli would get his shot at revenge. He waited his turn at Notre Dame. The Irish went in a different direction, and he might get the chance to prove why they shouldn't have done that or that they made the right decision. And to be clear, I think the Notre Dame coaching staff made the right decision by going with Kenny Minchey and CJ Carr. But this is not official just yet. Syracuse did add LSU transfer quarterback Ricky Collins in the winter. Most people expected him to be the starter. He's going into his third year of college football. But then they lost their number one wide receiver, Trevor Pena, and Fran Brown, the head coach, suggested that part of the reason why Pena wanted out is because he wasn't sold on Collins and didn't think that he would be able to put up quite the same numbers. I don't know why Fran Brown decided to say that, but he did. And now the fact that they're in the market again for another quarterback in the transfer portal seems to suggest that they don't have a ton of faith in Collins. And even if Angeli doesn't end up with Syracuse, if you're Collins, you're like, what the hell, man? I just got here and you're already looking for my alternative. So I think there's a real chance that Steve Angeli ends up playing at Syracuse and could end up facing Notre Dame in November. This would be Notre Dame's first time facing a former quarterback in a meaningful game since Phil Jurkovec, but they never even really got the chance to play. Well, they got the chance to play Phil Jurkovec in 2020. Notre Dame won that game. A lot of juice in that matchup. I mean, Kyle Hamilton was chirping Phil Jurkovec all game, but then it looked like Phil Jurkovec was going to have a chance to play in Notre Dame Stadium, and that just didn't really work out. He was hurt and then posted that really stupid Instagram post the day of the game. And then he went to Pittsburgh, and then maybe he was going to play for the Panthers in that game, but then he was so bad they moved him to tight end. So if Steve Angeli were to come to Notre Dame, it would be the first since like Zach Frazier at UConn. He's a little bit better than him. But we're going to have to wait and see. Angeli is also going to look at Tulane, who's a school I brought up when he first decided he was going to enter the transfer portal. Virginia Tech has been linked to him as well. I was kind of hoping for him to go to Tennessee. I thought that'd be a great option for him to potentially start in the SEC, but they basically traded Nico Iamaleava for Joey Aguilar at UCLA. Very, very just college football just storyline that kind of encompasses all the craziness that's going on with the transfer portal these days. So it's not going to be Tennessee. It might be Syracuse. Either way, I'm very excited to see how this plays out. We do know how the situation with Kennedy Urlacher played out, though, because he is going to USC. That was announced. Tom Loy from 24/7 Sports said that USC was the team to watch from the moment that Urlacher announced that he was going to enter the transfer portal. And look, Urlacher wants to play. He's probably the fifth safety on Notre Dame's roster when he decided to leave. So I'm not really surprised. And in somewhat of the same way that Tennessee traded Nico Iamaleava for Joey Aguilar, and I say traded loosely, obviously. Notre Dame kind of traded Kennedy Urlacher for Elijah Hughes. Urlacher is a bigger name for sure, but Elijah Hughes plays defensive tackle, and he's definitely more important to this year's team. So it's kind of funny how that worked out. Obviously, Chad Bowden has his fingerprints all over this. There have been some rumors circulating online that Chad Bowden has inquired about a lot of players on Notre Dame's active roster behind the scenes to see if they would be interested in going to USC. And it looks like he got one, right? He might have cast a pretty wide net. He got one fish in Kennedy Urlacher, not the biggest one in the world. But ever since Chad Bowden left for USC, it feels like they have tried to be as much of a pest as possible, right? Their videos on social media seem targeted at Notre Dame. Chad Bowden is doing all this stuff. And it's kind of funny, too, because when Chad Bowden was at USC, there was this notion that he didn't really like talking to the press. That wasn't his thing. But then ever since he's gone to USC, that's all he's done. He just did an interview with Josh Pate. He did an interview with someone from Yahoo Sports. He's been really out in front ever since he joined the Trojans personnel department. And hey, good for him. But it's kind of like your little sibling who will do anything to get your attention, even if they have to stoop to some embarrassing means in order to do so. That's kind of what USC is doing. I'm not saying that's the only reason why they went out and got Kennedy Urlacher. I still think that Kennedy Urlacher is going to be a good player in college football. I just don't think he was going to make much of an impact for Notre Dame this year. He wasn't happy with that, so we went to a place where he could play earlier. No problem at all with what Kennedy Urlacher decided to do. I just think that it's funny how all this stuff is happening between Notre Dame and USC off the field. Does this move make that game more interesting? Not to me. Personally, I think the Notre Dame USC game is going to be intriguing no matter what. There's probably going to be some more stuff that comes up between now and then, though. I'd be willing to bet it's all on USC's side because Notre Dame really has not responded to one of the childish things they have done since then. But all that matters is what happens between the lines between these two teams. And for much of the past 15 years, Notre Dame has dominated USC in between those lines. So we're going to see how it plays out, but I do think that there's certainly some drama going on in the transfer portal, and it's going to continue to happen for the next few days because the transfer portal window closes at the end of this week. Now, we still might hear some announcements kind of trickle in late, as late as next week, but for all the latest updates, you know where to go. Locked On Irish every single weekday. But that is going to be a wrap for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. I'm going to be right back here tomorrow morning with another crossover episode with Locked On Recruiting Insider Brian Smith. So be on the lookout for that. Also, make sure that you subscribe on YouTube or wherever you are listening to the podcast. Also, remember, like this video below if you're watching on YouTube, or rate the podcast 5 stars and leave a review, and I'll see you tomorrow.